I understand that y'all all have a report. If you don't, you will get. But we spent considerable time this morning on the HPD review committee. That's the reason I've asked them to stay here if there's any additional questions, but I'll open it in general. We're busy as we can be these days with the budget release. We'll start having hearings on it. It'll generate more questions. I think it's a sound budget. There was something written this morning said that he said he wouldn't raise taxes in 26 and during this year was a reference. That's not what was said. We said that 25 is a pathway to 26 with all the tough decisions on the table. We're going to look at efficiencies with our review of all of our departments, our collaboration, and see where that puts us. I don't think it was fair to ask for increase in taxes or fees before we've completed a review of the departments and certainly visited with other levels of government. So with that said, I'll answer any questions.
Mayor, how many people have been disciplined in connection with this review, and could more be potentially disciplined due to the results we saw today?
That's an HPD decision, IAD. There's investigations, reviews by IAD still going forward, so that's not my call.
So to clarify, Mayor, is this the final report you're receiving from this?
No, it's an interim. They made it very clear. Interim.
Okay.
They still have work to do.
A clarification on one of the pieces of information that was given after you were talking about the recommendations. You said that a substantial amount of reports, no victim was found. Was that in the 10?
No victims were found. Mm-hmm. No, ma'am. I don't know where you picked up on that. We've actually got victims, and their cases have been referred to the DA's office.
That was one of the pieces of information that was said by Ms. Nowak. I was just hoping to see.
I think it's miscommunication because we have found victims, and they're receiving and been offered counseling.
The statement I made was just differentiating. I gave a specific statistic, which I don't have in front of me right now, about, I believe, actually it was like 87 cases were closed for lack of prosecution because the complainant indicated that they did not want to go forward, and we had, or HPD knew who the suspect was. And I differentiated that from there are a substantial amount of cases where they could not locate the complainant, but in those cases, they did not know the identity of the suspect at the time.
Mayor, why should we have trust in the chairperson of this review committee? She was pro tem or vice mayor during the time when these things were going on. And then most of these informations were known because Kemen and the others were running the public safety committee meetings.
Who was?
So she was part of the administration when these things were going on.
I think you got her mixed up with someone else. This is all very independent review panel that have not participated.
No, she's been part of the city.
No, you're just wrong.
Okay, I mean, what I'm just actually saying
is that you can trust this panel because I appointed them. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I got you, but you are not the only person in the city.
Well, I'm the one that appointed this committee.
Yeah, you're right. So the point I'm making is Kemen and all the others keep talking about things which they knew because she was chairperson of the public safety committee and others. So if we now start creating this type of scenario where we can make certain people look nice and others who are not there because they cannot defend themselves look bad, it's not good. Can you speak to that? Because that's what we are actually experiencing.
I'm going to repeat for you. The review committee has impeccable credentials and integrity. They're doing an independent review of the HPD process. I stand by it, and they've done outstanding work at this point, interim study, and they're going forward.
Follow up, you said you inherited a mess and they left you with more than $100 million in the fund. So if you are going to use some of that money to run some of the projects that you are doing, how can you have inherited a mess that you are using for your advantage? Can you speak to that?
The mess?
Yeah, you inherited a mess, you say.
Yeah.
But that mess left you with more than $100 million in the coffers, and you are using that to balance the budget. How could you have inherited a mess?
What contract are you talking about?
No, you said that you inherited a mess.
Okay.
And then you also told Mario that the one safety program had become a unsafe program. So constantly we have been following you, actually talking down on the projects that the other administration have done and other people. You have done very well, we get that politically. But when it seemed like you are going to destroy every other person who had worked in different administrations, I am an international politician, I am an international physician, I've worked in many countries, and London, France, and I will not sit back and listen to these things in America. We are giving America a bad image.
Let us hear other people's views. I respect you, and I'll be glad to talk to you and give you additional time.
Mayor, you mentioned the letter from Executive Assistant Hatcher.
Yes, sir.
This morning during the City Council. You mentioned that this investigation was launched by the letter from Executive Assistant Hatcher to Chief Finner. Chief Finner launched the investigation back on February 22nd. It's been documented. We highlighted that letter. It's come obviously to light as a result since that there are some questions surrounding the Hatcher letter. You have a new chief in place. This is over 10 days old now. Has anybody updated you with the status as to whether or not this investigation letter began on something that was untruthful?
That's under review. And obviously, we have to let the process go forward. I'm certain people will be held accountable, but that's an active IAD investigation that we need to let them do their job.
In your opinion, how long does it take someone to identify whether or not someone was at a meeting or not?
My opinion is to do it right, take the time to adequately do it, and that's what's taken place.
And to Houstonians that saw a rapid demotion of 2 assistant chiefs in Deese and Garcia because of this letter
of another
and this investigation.
IAD investigation that, quite frankly, had been closed a week ago Thursday.
And as we report, it was reopened because we had covered that document, right?
Yeah, go ahead. Give yourself a shout out.
What I'm just trying to identify here.
No,
Mayor.
You understand the process because you reported it. It was reopened, and we need to let IAD and the leadership do their job.
Mayor, taxpayers pay about 7 out of their 10 city tax dollars for public safety. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And yet we heard this morning that record keeping was unintegrated or non-integrated and obsolete. When we're investing that much money every year into police, how does that not get noticed and fixed over the years? And I always call her Councilmember
Greg,
I mean, you may be able to shed some light, because we had lack of integration and we had obsolete record keeping, which contributed, based upon the interim report, to the mess we have.
Well, I think anyone that reviews HPD operations knows that their technology is not what it should be. It didn't get this way recently. Goes back for years. Here's a dilemma for a police department and a chief. The public notices patrol cars. Council members get requests for response time, neighborhood patrols, storefront offices. You don't get constituents asking for technology or bookkeeping. And so what happens is you ought to go look at their control center. I get invited to look at Chevron's, just to draw a comparison with the public and the private sector. Chevron's got a control panel that is monitoring every well they're drilling in the world right now, real time. Go to the 9th floor of the Travis building. Not good. The computers are old. Their data center is old. So how did we get into some of the questions that I think Councilman Pollard did a fine job of saying? The levels of control, accountability, communication, transparency. It's not what's being requested by previous administrations, council, responding to the public. I asked Chief Finner last year about getting the uniformed officers from behind the desk. He said, well, part of that through the years is you keep your uniform there because when council cuts your budget, before we had the prohibition against defunding police, when they start cutting, the first jobs that they cut are the office jobs, behind the desk jobs. So if you put a uniformed officer, they're protected. If you had civilians there, they'd be let go. And I think I saw the number today, we're from the over 2,000 civilian jobs in HPD, we're down to 900. You know, resources matter. So I think this has been, as tragic as it is, hopefully it's a wake-up call. You know, we had requests this morning from council members about additional law enforcement funding or accountability in our services provided to the victims. Training for officers. First, that 50-some-odd hours that I think the panel recommended takes them off the street. You need to be able to backfill them on the street. So, you know, Houstonians support their law enforcement. We need them. But we're not doing it with high tech. We're not doing it with collaboration with other agencies. We've just got a lot of work to do.
The term is force multiplier.
Yeah.
You know, when you have limited force and we know we're understaffed, you know, by any comparison.
Sure.
That technology can get into the gap and make the best use. And it just doesn't seem like the investment was made, even though we spend 7 out of $10 on public safety.
We're going to do a complete review of HPD best practices or lack of best practices. Like I said, let me reinforce from someone that's been in public office. We respond to the public. The public wants more visibility of law enforcement, the hot spots that we describe. The administrative duties get ignored. You know, we could spend an hour talking about the forensic lab, the neglect from being able to get the evidence ready. So we have a lot of work to do. No, I mean, I wouldn't have run for office if this place was working. And public safety was one of the things that I was most concerned about. It still is. The budget reflects that. But you're right, we've got to spend every dollar properly. We've got to do the recruiting that's necessary. The number one recruiter for HPD and the fire historically has been active duty officers recommending to their nephews, their cousins, their brothers, several generations. We've got an assistant chief that his father was HPD. His two brothers are. So we've lost that component. Now folks are not recommending to their family members or their friends or community to be police officers or firefighters. So we've got to correct that, and we're going to.
Mayor Sylvester Turner kept talking because we have covered this city for more than 10 years.
Sure.
Mayor Sylvester Turner kept talking about the capping of the finances of the city and pointing fingers at Austin, the senators, and the others. Respectfully, sir, you were there because you seem to have been fighting for the city, but you were choosing things that you were fighting for. Because we never saw you during the COVID fight in the city. Maybe your age or something, I get it. But since you did not actually fight for the finances to be given, for more cadets to be trained and other things, why do you think it should be different during your own administration?
First of all, your facts are wrong. And
oh, really?
I don't want to argue with you. Okay. Let me just state my facts. And I can document when I say I voted against the revenue cap at the state revenue cap. I tried to keep the cities at the level of the other cities. So I've regularly worked with the administrations, numerous, I think there's 9 that I've worked with, to get the city additional resources. Last session, I had a great session allowing Houston First to recover the hotel occupancy tax, 3 miles in every direction, $3 billion. So that'll free up some money that the city's spending currently on infrastructure and quality of life issues downtown within that 3 miles. Our theater district will get additional resources. So, let's be factual. I've been a partner with the City of Houston my entire public.
So follow up, as you yourself said, I didn't say you voted against more funding to be brought here. Now I have said, why should you be given more funding? Why should it go above the level that Turner was using?
It's not me, it's not me getting more funding, it's our departments getting more money. So anyway, anyone else?
Thank you.
Back to HPD, you said during the presentation today that everything they recommended requires additional staffing, which highlights how we got into this mess. So how realistic are these recommendations, and the question I'm sure you're getting tired of hearing, how are we going to pay for them?
Well, they're realistic recommendations. How we're going to pay for it is document it and go to Houstonians. Houstonians will support additional effective law enforcement. They want accountability. They want the money be used for what you asked for, and that'll be accomplished, I would hope, this year.
Mayor, right now we only have an acting police chief. What's the timeline look like? What can citizens
There's not a
expect from
timeline.
that?
I want to emphasize there's been no loss in governance or supervision or accountability during the transition of the chiefs. This process is going forward. Chief Fenner has been very cooperative. Chief Satterwhite is engaged, leading the department, so that's not an issue. This lady's trying hard.
Given the findings we saw today, do you think replacing Chief Fenner is going to make a difference for HPD?
Is it going to make a difference?
Yeah.
Of course. Everyone has their own management style, and Acting Chief Satterwhite is governing. He'll be held accountable. The rank and file are looking to his leadership, so I don't see that being an issue.
And this is more for the committee. Did you guys find that this comes down more to a structural issue, or does it come down to a leadership issue?
I think it's more a question of structural issue, looking at all the different parts. And as I was saying during the meeting, a case goes to one division, then it goes to another division, and then back again to the other. And sometimes that's exactly what's slowing things up.
Ellen, what was your takeaway, or the committee's takeaway, that some divisions actually applied the code, but others didn't?
What's my takeaway from that?
Yeah.
That's one of the problems. That's my takeaway.
Did you guys drill down to understand how something like that could be utilized by one division but wasn't utilized by the other?
I don't think we have an answer to that yet.
I'm sorry, what?
I don't think we have an answer to that yet. Again, this is a preliminary recommendation, so.
Right. Mayor, was there any specific big takeaway that you had that prior to this that you were kind of caught you off guard with regards to this preliminary report?
I think the conversation by the council, your questions are indicative of the problem, that you've got a department with over 5,000 officers, and not everyone, but there's different styles or different levels of best practices. I'm going to say it again. I'm not new to criminal justice. HPD and cities bring me their concerns and issues, whether it's funding or staffing. They need a new statute on human trafficking, et cetera, et cetera. It is really, and I've dealt with just about every criminal justice issue you can imagine, actually overseeing the prison system. I am still shocked that something like this can be in practice for 10 years and no one brought it to me and no one discussed it. Now, in my visiting with other authorities, I'm not so sure other departments do not have similar practices. They labeled it something else. And I think that could be the rest of the story, not only across Texas, but across the nation.
Right.
We all know that departments probably have more work than they can get to. I think the real shame is that they didn't prioritize the type offense. It's just incomprehensible. Should never have been allowed and cannot be allowed that you have violent incidents, sexual assault victims, family violence victims, and they don't get to them. That just is not acceptable. Should have never been. But you go back to, previous chiefs sat right there in front of council, 2014. Says, I'm not going to get to 20,000 cases. Now, I don't recall from the discussion that they were labeling of the nature of those cases. Obviously, I think the public thinks any incident report needs addressing, and that should be the goal. Do you know how many cars are broken into? Car burglaries, and they never see an officer. They might go to the station and report it. More and more, you get reports, it's getting to be the part of living in Houston, but that's unacceptable. That's the reason I ran for office. Response time. My house is broken into a couple years ago. Came in the back door, alarms, sirens going off, strobe lights going off. They took their time, 8 minutes in my house, leave out the front door. The bad guys are not worried about the response time because we're understaffed. I can remember growing up in Houston, a burglar alarm, it served its purpose. So we got to do better.
If we're hearing that this is a structural issue, this is how we ended up here. Last week we found out that the only family who had a murder case suspended, that HPD knew about this murder case for the better part of a month, and they still had not reached out to that family, even though they're saying they're prioritizing reaching out to victims of violent crimes. Does that show that there's some sort of structural issue with the investigation itself?
Our chairperson just said in her opinion, it was structural. And those things will be reviewed. We'll have outside review of HPD.
But does this indicate a structural issue with the actual review into the suspended cases if they're not reaching out
I don't believe there's a structural. That incident is being reviewed, but I haven't seen personally a structural problem in the review process, and that's the purpose of this review group, to look, I said it early on, look over the shoulder of HPD. I think HPD is doing a fine job of the review.
We have one
There's things they could do better that we heard this morning, and those, as the interim report, we'll follow up on it.
All due respect to your time as chairman of criminal justice, we do have another member of the committee who has law enforcement experience. You've got a chance to look under the hood of this. At this stage of the inquiry, what do you think, Ranger? What can you offer us about what went on and this dysfunction?
I'd refer to the report. That's our preliminary findings. And before we address any final results, we're still in process.
And that's a good experienced answer from a top investigator.
Mayor, question.
Look at the report.
Mayor, question for Alan, sir. There's been some concern by Houstonians that have been expressed to us, and I'm certain they've been expressing this to other stations as well, with regards to how the city was portrayed in recent years as crime numbers were going down, stats were going down. As a result of what we have seen since February 22nd and this announcement publicly at a news conference by Chief Finner, has this been an area that your committee has been looking at as to whether or not the stats that were conveyed to Houstonians, that they are going down and we are a safer city, may actually not be completely accurate as a result of these cases being suspended?
To answer your question specifically, no, we have not been involved.
I'd love if you could reschedule this press conference. It's disrespectful to the citizens' views.
I'm sorry, we'll get right to you.
I couldn't hear.
In fact, thank you. We'll end it right now.
That has not been a part of our process. Our job is to review the reviewers, and that's what we're involved in.
Right. Mayor, you want to add on that? Budget?
Well, crime rates are going down across the nation largely coming out of COVID. I think we can justify reviewing Houston's numbers. I think with some of the issues we're discussing this morning, I think there's a large number of crimes that are not being reported. We have a large immigrant community that is very hesitant, and we talked about the language barriers this morning, very hesitant to report, certainly domestic crimes. Any social agency will tell you part of its cultural, part of its language.
Right.
The concern, it's hard to call HPD or an authority and report the crime at your apartment if you're worried about your immigration status. So, you know, we have a job to do to encourage everyone to report their crimes. So back to the stats, I think it deserves reviewing.
And last question.
And the numbers can be going down, but it's the perception of the residents, our surrounding areas. You know, crime doesn't stop at the city limits. We got to deal with the county numbers and adjoining jurisdictions.
Last question. Dallas last week, without mentioning Houston specifically, made a comment in promotion of their current chief, Mr. Eddie Garcia.
I'll be darned.
Did you see those comments, and what was your reaction to them?
The comments by whom? The city manager?
Yeah, by the city manager. Well,
I'm busy focusing on Houston.
We brought up the city manager. So
Sir?
You brought up the city managers now. That's
I
fine.
just, I read comments.
And what was your thoughts on those comments?
I'm focused on the city of Houston. We're going to do everything we can to get the very best chief.
Have you spoken at all with Chief Garcia? Have you spoken with Chief Garcia?
Hey, could you kind of talk about the proposal to allow TransStar cameras to record and how this would work and how much it may cost real quick?
TransStar on our
freeways,
thoroughfares.
yes,
That's an interesting issue that's been around, and I've probably been briefed on as much as anyone. At one time, I would have been hesitant to record private travel. There's certain things residents do traveling that they would think no one's business. But I think it's evolved now that we're concerned enough about human trafficking, drug dealing, dangerous driving, road rage, that I've moved in the direction that TransStar and the recording of folks' dangerous driving ought to be reported. So, yes, it's evolved through the years.
So it is something that you guys are proposing that you want to see
you need
happen?
safeguards, you need due process, you need all the good governance, you need protocols, but at the end of the day, it's all about public safety, ending road rage, assisting law enforcement to have another set of eyes on our thoroughfares and roads. So thank y'all for being here. I got to go.